the post-election landscape for energy policy. Before we begin, I wanted to cover just a few housekeeping items. Thank you all for participating and joining us. First of all, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the chat button, which there should be a panel at the bottom on the right-hand side of your monitor or your screen. There should be a chat button, and you can simply insert any questions there, and we'll try to monitor it as we go along to take any questions and pose them to the panelists. Also, we value your opinion and appreciate your participation this afternoon. And if you have any technical questions, you can find additional answers to some common technical issues on the help button at the top of your screen. We also wanted to provide just a bit of context for this afternoon's discussion. We acknowledge that there are disagreements that remain over which candidate is actually the president-elect of the United States. Our first webinar was held prior to the election, and we focused on what we expected to be energy policies under either a continued or a second Trump administration or a Biden administration. We are going to focus this afternoon on the Biden administration, mostly because we expect in and out because we only have an hour, and we expect that for a Trump administration, it would be more of what we already have seen and what's underway. Finally, our discussion and remarks today are our own. They are not those of our clients or our law firm. We are also not providing legal advice through this discussion. Turning to our program, I'm pleased to be joined by my colleagues at Thompson Coburn, Jack Jacobson and Kyle Simpson. Jack is an advisor in the firm's lobbying and policy group. He has a wide range of public policy and strategic communications experience in regional and international law firms and public affairs firms, where he's worked with clients on diverse matters related to emerging energy technologies, natural resources and environmental management, cannabis, municipal government, and education policy. Jack's clients benefit from his detailed understanding of their business models and his knowledge of their market differentiators to more effectively engage Congress and the administration. His clients have included a major U.S. city, a natural gas research consortium, a major energy efficiency manufacturing company, an international telecom company, and a public power system. On a personal note, I've had the pleasure of working with Jack on energy matters. And I must say it's both intimidating and a bit inspiring to witness him turn an expression of interest or concern from a client into forming a delegation, developing a platform and talking points, and identifying the members, staff, and committees that we need to address and approach in order to make sure the client's concerns are heard. Our second panel, welcome, Jack. Our second panelist this afternoon is Kyle Simpson. Kyle is a senior advisor in our lobbying and policy group, and he works with clients to build relationships with legislators, regulators, and policymakers on Capitol Hill to achieve legislative, regulatory, investment, and project development goals in the energy, environmental, natural resources, and foreign policy sectors. Kyle was senior advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Energy during the Clinton administration and also served previously as the Associate Deputy Secretary of the Department of Energy. He's been involved in major environmental initiatives, such as minimizing the environmental impact of natural gas and oil production and efficiency of refrigerators and other appliances made in the United States. Kyle is currently working with clients to implement workable incentives for carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and develop environmentally superior energy projects that include LNG export facilities. Of course, I've got a personal note about Kyle as well. I take personal comfort in having him as a colleague and a resource. Kyle seems to know everyone. And in this town where it's critical to not only know who can get things done, but also everyone who you need to contact if you don't know the right people, it's been a gift to have Kyle at our firm. As for the agenda, welcome, Kyle. As for the agenda for our discussion, Jack and Kyle will first provide an overview of the outcome of the elections, including some things that we don't know yet. And then we'll turn it into a moderated discussion. And again, feel free to include questions in the Q&A. So with that, I will turn it over to Jack and Kyle to give us an overview of the election. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne, for those warm introductions. I'm going to try and share my screen now. We've got a couple slides of a deck, and then we'll move into the moderated discussion. There. I think that's working. That is the old one. Pardon me. I had this up just a moment ago. Thank you, David. Nope. Apologies. There we go. I'm still getting used to WebEx. All right. For the election results, what we have right now, this is the current landscape. Actually, I don't think Alaska has been added to this since that was just called yesterday, but the current landscape has Biden ahead with 290 electoral college votes and President Trump with 214. Uncalled races include Georgia now and North Carolina. Democrats are currently leading in Georgia and the president is currently leading in North Carolina. But results haven't been certified, so these numbers are certainly subject to change between now and the time the Electoral College meets. And speaking of that, we have some really interesting dates to watch. This week, Senate Republicans held their leadership elections, and we didn't see any major changes there. Next week, House Democrats hold their leadership elections, and again, we're not seeing in the top tier a lot of likely change. December 8th is the next real inflection point, which is when states need to certify their election outcomes heading into the December 14th meeting of the Electoral College delegations. That's the first time. The December 8th and 14th are the next real important dates for the presidential election. Then move into the convening of the 117th Congress on January 3rd or 4th. And then what everyone has their eyes on, the Georgia Senate runoff elections. Neither current senators, Perdue nor Loeffler, were able to achieve 50% plus one of the vote in their contested elections in November.
Okay.
So the runoff will be on January 5th.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Have you shared the slides? I'm not sure everyone can see them.
I tried to share the slides, but thank you for that. I will try one more time.
Here they come. It says you're starting to share. There they are. Oh, they're beautiful. Thank you.
There we go. I wasn't sure if I was sharing or not. So
Thank you.
January 5th is the Georgia Senate runoff election. And then January 6th, Congress meets to count Electoral College votes. Kyle, anything that I'm missing here or any particular points you want to note? Kyle's having a little trouble with his audio coming through. So he'll check on that when we move on to the Senate balance of power. In the Senate, we've currently got 48 Democrats having been elected and 50 Republicans, adding in Alaska and North Carolina, where Cunningham has conceded in North Carolina and Al Gross has conceded in Alaska. So the two remaining seats that are open are really these two, and on the Democratic side, and those are the Georgia seats that we're going to be waiting for the election on.
The only observation I was going to make on the dates, Jack, was that Georgia election, as everybody knows, is January 5th. And that's adding a wrinkle into this whole decision-making, the politics behind the decision-making and certification of the presidential election.
Correct. We won't know if Democrats or Republicans will hold the majority in the Senate, but until that runoff election and certification, Republicans will remain in control in the chamber.
Correct.
We went through this. There are a couple of incoming, well, half a dozen incoming freshmen, 3 Democrats and 4 Republicans. So we'll be interested to see how they integrate into the chamber. Only 3 incumbents were defeated, Senator Gardner from Colorado, Senator Jones from Alabama, and Senator McSally from Arizona. And there were a couple of senators that just chose to retire this year. The spending has just been crazy. Again, my words, as Adrienne said, crazy spending in Senate elections this year. Just wanted to give you a feel of the top 10 races, where in four of these races, North Carolina, Iowa, South Carolina, and Arizona, outside spending was at least over $200 million in spending, and in 5 races, over $100 million in outside spending. Huge numbers, but likely to be dwarfed by the Georgia elections. Kyle?
It's quite possible, probable, given these numbers, that the Georgia election will see twice that nearly $300 million. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see $1 billion spent in those 2 Georgia Senate races.
Just extraordinary amounts of money to determine control of the Senate and whether or not President Biden could push through a more progressive agenda, or if he'll need to stay in the middle to work with Congress that would be divided as it is at the moment. The House, these numbers have changed just slightly. Democrats, I think it was yesterday, finally reached the 218 member threshold controlling the chamber. There are about a dozen, maybe 15 races that are outstanding at the moment. Democrats could pick up a couple of those, but this was really surprising. Democrats were expected to pick up 5 to even 15 seats and ended up losing 5 to 10 at least, it looks like. Republicans have edged in on their minority status, and the midterms usually see a loss of seats for the president in power historically.
So, Jack, if one is an empirical analysis walk, and meaning loves looking at polls and trying to figure out where they went wrong or were right, a good one to look at, or an interesting one to look at, is Texas House's 23rd district, the Texas 23rd district. That was William Hurd's district, and Hurd, a Republican, a minority Republican from West Texas, decided not to run again. Evidence was that he could not win that seat, and it turns out Tony Gonzalez, a Republican, won it with 50.7% of the vote. You'll see pieces, stuff like that across throughout the returns, where there was on a popular vote basis, a distinction between the votes for the Democratic presidential candidate Biden and what people voted for in their home districts and states for senators and congressmen.
Yeah, and Democrats were supposed to pick up a lot more seats in the suburbs, and that failed to materialize largely. With that, we're going to move on to our moderated discussion, and I will stop sharing my screen while Adrienne Clair leads us in our discussion on policy issues.
Thanks for that, Jack. I'll start with just a few substantive areas that we discussed because us FERC kids have things we'd love to talk about, and I'm sure there are others. First, what we've been calling here among the three of us, we'll gently call it agency disruption. Of course, in the past week, President Trump has replaced Neil Chatterjee as the chairman of FERC, and fired Defense Secretary Mark Esper, and there have been other sort of ousters and resignations. The first is a question focused on FERC. And I will say as an aside, the news cycle now seems to be what used to be, days versus hours. The news cycle now is how quickly you can fill up the 280 characters on your Twitter feed. And so that's been sort of impacting the speed with which we find out things that are going on. But with respect to Neil Chatterjee's demotion, and there are 2 pending nominations for whom the Senate had the confirmation hearings, but there hasn't been a confirmation, is my understanding. How do you see FERC changing over the next 4 years under a Biden administration?
As far as the leadership of FERC, the commissioners themselves, the president has the ability at any moment, whether by just a stroke of a pen or a click of a few keys on Twitter, to change the chairmanship. which he did, as you've acknowledged. The president does not have the authority to remove a FERC commissioner. One FERC commissioner can only be removed for, I'll just pick a word that meets a lot of things, of malfeasance, violating the law, and that's never happened. So you've got two Republicans on the commission now, and you have one Democrat. If the two nominees, one Democrat, one Republican, that the Senate has before it now, were to be confirmed, and if Mr. Biden becomes the president on inauguration day, the FERC would be 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and the president would instantly probably select Rich Glick as chairman, but it would still be a Republican majority FERC, even in the absence of the confirmation, which is not likely in a lame duck session like this. There will still be 2 Republicans and a Democrat, and I think Neil's Ms. Chatterjee's commission is up at the end in 6 months, in June or July. That would be the next one that would open. So you'll probably have a Republican majority commission with a Democratic chair until then.
Thank you. Jack, anything you were going to add? Sorry.
Yeah, I just think that that in that circumstance where there would be 2 Republican commissioners with perhaps Glick as chair, that Glick would look for opportunities to partner with Chatterjee on moderate moves. I wouldn't see any major changes, but I think that's why we've all sort of talked about that's how Mr. Chatterjee was, Commissioner Chatterjee was demoted, was he was willing to work on some of the really thorny climate change issues that not all of his colleagues are bought in on. And so I think you could see Chatterjee and Glick do some work together until a Democratic majority really might take bigger steps.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's the carbon pricing policy, proposed policy statement on carbon pricing. I saw, I think yesterday, Chatterjee, I keep wanting to say chairman, I have to get that muscle memory gone. Chatterjee gave remarks to NARUC and acknowledged that there have been some missteps with respect to including the states in the energy dialogue. And so, and I again saw that sort of passing through trade press. I think it was Utility Dive or something. But to your point, that's another area where I think this sort of coordination with the states is an area where Glick and Chatterjee have not always been on the same page or of one accord. And so that may be another area where we would see some more work together with Glick as chair, or more efforts to work together as Glick as chair. And then sort of more broadly, if there's continued turnover by President Trump as long as he is in office, what is the effect of this continued turnover in terms of agencies simply having the capacity to carry out their missions?
Well, go ahead, Jack. I've got, you may be able to see, I have a beautiful black cat trying to interfere with and participate in the presentation. So, Jack, if you can answer that for just a sec, I'm going to try to talk her into going somewhere else.
Excellent. All this working from home is interesting for all of us. So thank you to the viewers for being patient with us. The uncertainty at agencies is just really difficult. If the president continues to switch out existing appointees with others, or demote them, or transfer them, or outright fire them, it's gonna be really hard for him to get his final regulatory issues out the door and into process. And it really demoralizes an agency or department to have continued turnover at such a high rate this close to a change in an administration. So I hope the president's not shooting himself in the foot by making so many disruptive changes that his agenda isn't able to go until January 20th. But I think the incoming President Biden is going to have some real work to do, and his team, at just stabilizing agencies and ensuring that we have the talent at these agencies to effectively regulate and carry out the administration's priorities. And with a divided Congress, you absolutely are going to see a lot, and we'll get into this a little bit later, I think, you'll see a lot more executive action rather than legislative action in terms of climate change, and climate mitigation, and resiliency, and even in terms of green jobs and technology improvements that are going to have to be done administratively rather than legislatively.
Thank you. I'm going to stay on that point. I'm going to pick up where you left off, Jack, which is, sort of acting not legislatively, but administratively by the executive branch, which is, at least for the next question I'm going to pose to you and Kyle, the use of executive orders. And of course, this isn't new to the Trump administration. The Obama administration used this tool as well. But for the energy industry, just drawing on two, there was President Trump issued 2 executive orders about a year apart from each other. In 2019, there was an executive order on both dealing with procurement security and protecting U.S. systems and the infrastructure against foreign adversaries, and the threat posed by foreign adversaries. And so one in May of 2019 dealt with procurement of information technology system equipment, and then in 2020, President Trump issued an executive order on securing the bulk power system from these foreign threats by foreign threats and adversaries. And so first question for you is sort of this use of executive orders, whether or not we should expect that the Biden administration will move quickly to use this tool of executive orders to sort of undo or reinforce aspects from the Trump administration. And then I'll pose the second one just so you have it in mind. How will the Biden administration balance using executive orders or other ways to undo or change some of the policies from the Trump administration while also moving forward with implementation of their own?
So the executive order, as you pointed out, is a common practice. A key thing to remember about an executive order is that it does not have the force of law. And so they are as easily removed as they were quickly put in place. Your comment about President Obama, there was a turning point in his administration when the Senate refused to go along and the Congress refused to work with him, in his words. So he decided that he was going to govern with his pen. And he did, and you saw some very, some very interesting environmental rules come out. The clean air plans that came out of the administration, which were then turned back, and it took more than just an executive order to turn some of those things around in a Trump administration. But the start of turning them around was in the executive order. So you will see, I think, the first day of a Biden administration, a number of executive orders. The first ones probably will deal with immigration and the travel bans, I would guess, and the maybe something to do with other aspects of immigration policy. Then there will be a series of environmental issues. Virtually any environmental executive order that was imposed by President Trump will be rescinded. That really only starts the work, though, because there are many of those things. The statutes have had legal judicial decisions that have affected their implementation. They need to be addressed by the Congress. We may be looking at a classic one here with the Supreme Court looking at just having yesterday heard the arguments on the Affordable Care Act. Could well be an area. But I think that the Georgia elections are going to have a strong impact on on how often and on which matters President Biden would use the executive pen. If he thinks that he is a creature of the Senate, remember, he spent many years as a senator. He has good relationships with the Senate and individual members, including Chairman McConnell. and he's been known to work and to achieve compromise and solutions on some very tough issues. So, you know, we'll know who the senators are from Georgia before January 21st. I think we will then learn a lot about what his intentions and plans are going forward by the range and scope of that first set of executive orders that comes out.
I agree with everything that Kyle said, and I just expand on that a little bit to talk about cybersecurity in terms of just procurement. I think what you're going to see is a President Biden reinstate a cybersecurity czar. So it would look at security for the bulk power system, not only through a procurement lens, but also a regulatory lens, and would be more coordinated across the government and acknowledge the roles that FERC and NERC might play in crafting appropriate rules, and then where the Department of Energy or the administration, other means might need to step in terms of ensuring that our power systems are secure and look at it more holistically through rather than just a procurement lens.
That's
if I can expand on that just a second. I mean, the security of the grid is a good example, I think, of how far-reaching an executive order could be. And also just how far-reaching an industry like many of the folks on the watching this webinar, how far you want it to be. And so there is grid security is important, certainty is important, but if there is, for instance, uniformity in the or consistency in the approach that the various transmission industry participants believe that should go forward, the transition team is a good time. The transition time is a good time to get those opinions put in place. There are no limits on. There are no time limits on submitting comments to them. There's no formal way really to submit comments to them, but opinions can be rendered in there so that they pay attention. And while they won't comment on them generally, or even necessarily ask for them, if there's something that's truly important that you want to have, that people want to have them understand, now's a good time to get that information to them.
Kyle, I think this is one of the times where that he knows everyone is going to come in handy for all of us. So thank you for that point. Thank you for that point, honestly. And I just on the point that Jack made about hopefully there would be more sort of coordination among agencies. One of the concerns, there are many, or there are several, but one of the concerns with the executive orders that I just discussed is that the executive order on the bulk power system identifies certain agencies by name, Homeland Security and some others, doesn't specifically identify FERC. DOE was charged with the 150-day rulemaking requirement, which has now passed. DOE issued a request for information. FERC in September, at their September 17th meeting, issued a notice of inquiry. And so, and of course, NERC under Federal Power Act Section 215 FERC has named NERC as the Electric Reliability Organization. And so I think there's some amount of concern for those who would have to comply with whatever is going to come out of who's calling the shots with which you have to comply. And so that notion of some amount of coordination, and Kyle, your point about pushing for that now, I think are both well received. I'm going to ask about a couple more rules. I'm going to drill down just one level on a few rules and ask you guys to comment on those to the extent you're comfortable. And this is more in the category of sort of undoing or rolling back on some of what was put in place during the during the Trump administration. So first, Biden's EPA is expected to, I was going to say the word clawback, roll back in some respects the Affordable Clean Energy Rule before the DC Circuit can rule on it. And EPA and DOT are expected to revisit rules easing federal tailpipe pollution standards, as well as Trump's efforts to block California and other states from enforcing more stringent emissions rules. And there are several of these. But any predictions on how soon we will see specific changes to any of these rules? The one other one I'll point out is methane emissions limits on the oil and gas industry that Biden is expected to want to reinstate. And I think some on our call or on our session would like to hear about those. But for any of those, what you would expect in terms of timing, to the extent you're willing to offer a prediction, timing of when we would see rollback, of some of those rules would be great.
So I think that part of the answer to this is an element of attention to detail in the part of the new appointees, and how quickly you have some new appointees. So I think it's not likely to see rollback of a formal rollback in the form of rulemakings to roll anything back until the agencies have their cabinet level positions confirmed. It's quite likely most administrations get their cabinet, the EPA administrator, the Secretary of Energy, Interior, Treasury, those tend to happen rather quickly. And there's no reason that this won't happen rather quickly this time. We're hearing a lot of talk about, well, GSA, Government Service Administration, is not not said that Biden is the president-elect, and therefore the transition offices are not available to them. They don't have access to classified briefings, secure phones, and funding. That is an impediment to quick transition. But as I read this morning, President Biden knows where the bathrooms are in the White House. They know how the phones work. They know how the systems work. Many of his appointees know, or his people on the transition team. The list of agency review that was published yesterday. The people on it it's a list of former Democratic government senior officials. They know their way around these agencies. So I think that they'll be prepared to move ahead. How quickly they're willing to move ahead, though, I think comes to that point of detail. If you've watched, when one watched many of the actions of the Trump administration in an effort to quickly dispense with rules that they did not like from the Obama administration, the courts did not agree with what they did in many circumstances. And the Biden administration will not want to fall into that same trap with the judiciary. They'll want to be able to craft rules that will not be overturned. So I think that may take a little time. Although I suspect if you look at that list of the agency review teams, many of them have been in think tanks and academia for the last several years and may have been studying up on exactly what to write. And we'll just have to see how that plays. That doesn't answer your question on specific rules. I just think it's a trend. It's something you should watch.
May not have been a fair question. I had to ask it anyway.
Well, and then I'd expand on that to say that the Congressional Review Act is now effectively off the table. When you have a new president that comes in, as President Trump did 4 years ago, a new president, if he has a friendly Congress with them, can use the Congressional Review Act to look at recent regulations that have come out and nullify them. With the House even closer than it is currently, and the Senate at best divided 50-50, we're not going to see use of the Congressional Review Act to nullify regulations that have come out basically since May of the Trump administration. And then to Kyle's point on appointees, they're going to have to decide to what extent they want to go back to normal from pre-Trump versus how much they want to be more progressive and bite off even more through the regulatory process. And that'll depend again on how easy it will be for appointees to get confirmed by the Senate, and then the level of appetite that a President Biden would have to go further and do more regulatorily.
And just a little more granular, I agree with Jack, and a little more granularly, if some of the rules you were talking about, Adrienne, can directly be taken to the context of Paris and setting standards for emissions reductions. And I was looking and listening to people in the last couple of days, you know, that is one of the first things that a Biden will do, President Biden will do, is to say we're going to rejoin Paris. Much he'd probably say we're going to rejoin the World Health Organization. But some people think that just rejoining Paris is like getting on a Ferris wheel that, you know, other people are at the top and you're getting on it down here at the bottom. And the question is not so much what are your commitments going to be to reducing emissions? It's what are you going to do to enforce the reductions of those emissions? What's the regulatory framework that is going to actually cause that to happen? And that, I'm not sure you can do that all with executive orders. I know we can't do it all with executive orders or rolling back of some of the rules that are there. So it will take it'll take some statutory change, and that will take a little time.
Cal, you actually, go ahead, Jack.
I'd like to expand on that for just a minute. Effectively, a president, when President Trump came in, he had a friendly Congress. When President Obama came in, he had a friendly Congress. So for both of those presidents, they used the first 2 years of their term to push through big legislative ideas because they had friendly majorities. We see a different circumstance now with Biden coming in with, again, at best, a divided Senate and a House that's very closely divided. Biden's not going to be able to push through broad, grand legislative changes. He's going to need to focus his first 2 years on what can he do really effectively administratively and what can he do internationally. And we know that international relations is somewhere that Joe Biden is very comfortable, having served as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and being active in the Obama administration as vice president as an extension of the president with foreign leaders. So I think we're going to see a lot of work that's going to be done, again, through executive order and administratively, and a less focus on legislation over the first 2 years.
Apply, if you don't mind. Kyle, I was smiling just because when you said rejoin the Paris Accord, I thought he's going where I was trying to go next. So thank you. But apply that sort of expectation of Biden's administration needing to focus on what they can do through executive order or administratively as opposed to statutory changes to climate change. And what we expect, first of all, remind or refresh us on Biden's intention with respect to carbon emissions, and then how soon you think he will move to implement it, what he could actually get done. And I'll tack on one other note before I let you guys go with the answers, which is, or pose answers to the question, which is whether or not you would expect that if Biden administration moves forward with climate change legislation, something more grand than can be achieved through an executive order, would you expect that to also include some consideration of ancillary or impact issues? For example, I know for cooperatives, would that include forgiveness of RUS loans or those sorts of impact issues that might come from climate change legislation?
Jack, I've gone first on the last couple. You want to go?
No, you can go.
Okay. So I think just touching a bit on staying a bit on how much executive order, how much legislation. If by chance so a data point, many of you have probably heard this, no Democratic president, newly elected Democratic president since Grover Cleveland came into the White House without having a majority in the Senate and the House of his own party. That's interesting. and it begs some people to say, well, that means we need to go be moderate in what we try to achieve. And my friend, the black cat, is back, so I'm just going to let her roam around, and I'm going to try to focus on this webinar. Some would say, well, no, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party helped us get to where we are right now, notwithstanding we lost some House seats. So we've got to figure out how to deal with that. If the Georgia seats stay Republican, or one of them stays Republican, then it's executive orders and moderation in legislation. If the two seats became Democratic, there would be a strong push to be more aggressive with legislation. I'm not knowing what Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are thinking, and well, I've got a guess, but not knowing exactly what they're thinking and how they have to work with their membership. Still probably going to be more moderate. So climate change legislation, back up to the policy. There was a big debate in the Trump policy, the Biden policy team, as to what should their climate position be. Should it be, to use the majority of AOC, should it be her Green New Deal, or should it be something different? And the folks it's a moderation, but the place that you see the moderation is the commitment, the goal of 2050 net zero emissions for all energy, and 2035 in the electricity industry. And so from a technical perspective, notwithstanding things like RUS loans and amortization schedules and recovering on current investment, time for new projects to massive scale of these things, notwithstanding, just put that stuff aside for a moment, it's technically possible to make everything in the electric power sector all net zero if you allow the use of fossil fuels that don't emit. If you tried to do it with all green, with all renewable energy, it's a different question. And it's a storage issue, basically, and it's a transformation of the entire infrastructure. If you do it and this was the debate that they had in this group that came out with that policy, and the compromise they came out with was net zero emissions by 2035 in the electric sector, and then the industrial sector and the vehicle transportation sector, all of them together till 2050. But they also did not say all renewables by 2035. So that can give you some flavor of how that debate went on. Mm-hmm. Then when you go to, so if you went to legislation, what would that mean? Well, this is pure speculation, and as Adrienne said earlier, this is not the view of Thompson Coburn or any of our clients, or maybe even of me. But it is as I'm saying it. But if one looks out and reads the tea leaves to see where there might be compromise, it could be, let's get to something by 2035. Let's set a goal of net zero emissions in certain areas, but not all renewables. And we would probably throw in the preservation of nuclear to make that clear, because you have to have that to get to that objective. And then I would think that they might put a price on carbon. They already have agreed to a price on carbon in the form of the Section 45Q tax credit for carbon capture. And that's a fairly popular thing amongst members of Congress. They argue over the details all the time, but the idea is there. So I could see, and you've seen many big oil companies advocate for a price on carbon, and you've seen many in the environmental community advocate for a price on carbon. So if you were going to legislate, something like that could occur. But it will be, I just threw out a lot of reasons why it won't be easy.
Yeah. Kyle, I noticed that we have a question in the Q&A box. I was only monitoring the chat, so I apologize for that. But it goes to what you were just discussing. So the question is, would ERINs, which are the renewable identification numbers, be on the table in either Georgia Senate scenario? If yes, what would the program look like?
Ooh, I in the Georgia Senate scenario, meaning if the two Georgia seats became Democratic,
Mm-hmm.
then it's wide open for all things like that. I don't know what a specific proposal would look like, but I think if that were to happen, then all proposals like that would be on the table. But there would be a strong, depending on how aggressive that proposal is, there will also be a strong push on the more moderate side, who will look back and point clearly to President Clinton's first administration, first 2 years, and President Obama's first 2 years, where they went aggressively for things and proceeded to lose the Congress in the next election. And there will be a lot, you already see Congressman Clyburn from South Carolina. Anybody asks him a question about anything, that's what he talks about. So I would say, put it this way, it may come up, but it'll be open for serious debate and a good opportunity to interject the questioner's views into the debate.
Yeah, and let's not forget that in the absence of grand climate change legislation or even general energy legislation that's been really tough to get through Congress, there's still 2 bills that are passed every year that can address climate change issues. You've got the National Defense Authorization Act, where a ton of money is invested every year, and the Defense Department's really focused on resiliency and efficiencies. And I think Biden administration can work with Congress to plus up some of those numbers, do a little more research and development, and maybe some other creative initiatives to make the military more focused on climate change. And that's something that can get through Congress and does every year like clockwork. I think another thing we have to focus on is appropriations. What does that look like? Even if there aren't big plus ups in spending accounts, there can be a shifting within agencies from money, perhaps from fossil fuel research to more deployment of renewables or zero carbon technologies. And those are just choices, and those are choices that I think a Biden administration can work with Mitch McConnell on and do some deal cutting.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more sort of topical question, which is energy efficiency rules. Group of 15 states, DC and New York City, along with 5 environmental law groups, announced a pair of lawsuits, I think it was this week, demanding action on 25 separate energy efficiency rules that are now past congressionally mandated deadlines. DOE moved forward on several appliance efficiency rules during the Trump administration, generally finding that additional efficiency was not worth the cost. How soon do you expect a Biden administration will be able to move forward on these efficiency rules, and can you discuss the impact?
Very quickly. I would expect them to move very quickly. The efficiency standards, the practice of creating and implementing efficiency standards is well known in the agencies, Department of Energy particularly, and there has been great consternation in the rollback of those regulations. There have been, and I think a lot of the equipment manufacturers have objected to those rollbacks as well. It's very difficult, and so while they move quickly, they may not move quickly on all of them, because they will use the they'll do what the efficiency regs were designed for, which is to push the manufacturers to make the most efficient equipment that they can, and that is technologically available. But they will also have to take into account the economic impact of those decisions. But I think they'll be aggressive. I really expect that's an area where they will be. I've had a lot of experience on some of those appliance efficiency standards, and they're interesting how they are established.
And Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what the manufacturing world wants is certainty, right? They want to know what's coming down the road so that they can make their investments properly. And a lot of these folks have been expecting these efficiency rules to come out and have invested in research and development and new technologies, and they're not seeing a return on investment if those efficiency standards aren't updated and renewed to keep up with the technology that's available. You saw that with the tailpipe emissions fight with California versus, and some automakers versus other automakers that wanted to keep the status quo. I think as much certainty as a Biden administration and his regulators can inject into our capitalist society, the better for these equipment manufacturers and technology companies.
I agree.
Okay. I'm going to exercise moderator's privilege and ask about a few things I'm just curious about. So the first is, and you guys will email me later and tell me why did you ask me that question, but there you have it. The first is, being that 2020 is the year of the absolutely unexpected, what impact do you think COVID will have on all of this, right? And I'll ask it more specifically. It came up for me as you all were sort of talking through what can be done immediately and obstacles to getting things done through legislation. I realize, of course, the Biden administration has said that it will focus first and prioritize pandemic recovery and response. And so setting that aside, my question more goes to sort of, under any of these changes that the Biden administration may want to put in place, I would expect some consideration of workforce issues, economic issues, those sorts of things that are being impacted by the fact that we're in a pandemic. And so how do you expect going into 2021, the fact that we're expected to still be in a pandemic, even if there is a vaccine by then, we're expected to still be in a pandemic. How is that going to impact sort of force of momentum for the Biden administration?
Well, I'll go first this time, and Kyle can clean up after. But we've got to get the virus under control to be able to run the economy, and for the incoming president to be able to focus on his policy initiatives. The pandemic has decimated oil and gas markets, not just domestically, but globally. And that has a serious trickle-down effect. Yes, carbon emissions are down generally this year, but what's the cost? And then we've got so many wells that are now getting shut in, and we've got majors that are refocusing where their investments are going. I think that's going to put a damper on any policy initiatives going forward. I think the incoming president is going to want to capitalize on the advancement that renewables have made recently, and natural gas as well. But I think that the incoming administration will try to keep fossil fuel production down as it has declined during this pandemic. Kyle?
Thanks,
So I think the incoming administration is going to be judged very mightily, if that's the proper use of that word, on its response to COVID, because barring really effective vaccine and deployment of a vaccine throughout the population, it's going to be with us. And so while there was a lot of criticism about the way President Trump has handled it, there will be equal criticism of what the Trump administration does. And I think how successful and how transparent, understandable that the actions and then the result is going to affect how successful he is at persuading the Senate to go along with some things that require legislation. You know, adequate appropriations for certain things. How fast he gets his nominees confirmed, even, and so that they can focus on what they can do inside the administration, are all going to be affected. But I think one of the first tests, we don't know what's going to happen between now in the lame duck session on a COVID relief bill, and the stalemate between Pelosi and McConnell has really stymied any activity here, and the White House has done very little. They may disagree, but they've done very little to fix that roadblock. So if there is agreement, and if Biden can be persuasive, and if the policies and actions that they're taking are perceived to be effective or understandable or transparent, whatever the public needs in order to give confidence, then there may be some COVID relief bills, and then there will be definitely focused on employment, bringing the economy back. And then to Jack's point about, I think I would phrase on the energy side, I think I would phrase it a little differently. I think there will be an effort to capture and hold in place the advancements that have been made on renewable energies, clean energy as a result, and emissions reductions all over, and the fact that people were fascinated they could see fish in the canals in Venice, it's that kind of stuff. I think they will try to hold those lines without putting any new stuff in. The global energy market is changing, and Jack said earlier, they may do more stuff internationally than they're able to do domestically for a while because of the Congress. The global energy market is changing, and the big energy players, companies, are changing with it. And while a lot of them have been reluctant to come along, they're moving along quite quickly now. They're changing their policies. BP's come out, Shell's come out, Engie has come out. It was an interesting thing happened a couple of weeks ago. Engie, the big French energy company, under pressure from the French government, canceled a contract for liquefied natural gas with gas from the Permian Basin of the United States because they believed it was less greenhouse gas friendly than their other sources. Their other sources are Russia and Qatar. So that set up a whole really interesting discussion. But I think there will be a lot of effort to maintain the advances towards clean energy that were actually imposed by a collapse in oil prices and the COVID demand destruction.
Yeah.
So.
We are mindful of everyone's time, and we're right at 3:59 Eastern time. We're supposed to end at 4, but there is one last question that I'm going to put out there only because if it's posed, I think I should ask it, which is, and if you can, speed round answer it, that would be great. Do you see any hydrogen policies coming in this administration?
Absolutely. Hydrogen is the wonder fuel of the future. No emissions. It can be blue, it can be green, and it will have no emissions. I think we'll see a lot of that.
Thank you. With that, we are just approaching 4 o'clock. We'd like to thank everyone for participating this afternoon. Of course, thank you to Jack and Kyle and the cat. I will say that I got a text from one of the participants saying that's a pretty ominous presence on the day before Friday the 13th. So there you have it. The cat knew what was going on. Thank you both very much. And thanks everyone for participating with us this afternoon. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.